Hello, my name's George English. Of course, many people ask us to research their ancestors from England, Scotland or elsewhere, but very often, of course, they're from a more precise area than that, a city perhaps, a county. And so we've got a series of videos that we're making looking at places in more specific detail. Today's place is Yorkshire, the historic county of Yorkshire. We're very familiar, most of us, with the sort of cities of Leeds, Bradford, the ancient one of York and so forth, the coastline, Scarborough and so forth, and the ridings, a unique feature of Yorkshire. Their ancestors may come from these big cities and places, they may come from small places, they may have been in rural areas in the past and then migrated to the cities to work during the Industrial Revolution. Anyway, we're going to look at this and help to bring your ancestors from Yorkshire to life. So the factors in tracing ancestry in Yorkshire are much the same as anywhere else in England. The status, whether they're nobles or landowners, key thing being, were records kept for them, and if they've survived, can we find them? Professions, trades, employees, passengers may have left Yorkshire to go elsewhere in the world, and even at the bottom end, so to speak, the poor in the workhouse, records were kept in Yorkshire like any places. Being part of England, registration started in 1837 of births, marriages and deaths, and the census in 1841. Before then, parish registers were kept, and there's all sorts of other sources like wills and gravestones and so forth. Obviously the names, and obviously some of the names in Yorkshire will be specific to Yorkshire, others will be different, but like anywhere else, those names, if they're common or unusual, make it more or less difficult to find the ancestors and records about them. And continuity, did they live in Yorkshire for a long time, or did they move elsewhere, and so on and so forth. All same factors as we find in many other places. So looking at the history, Yorkshire was affected by two big things in the last 200 or 300 years. The Industrial Revolution, when the United Kingdom led the world in terms of becoming industrialised, mechanised in all sorts of industries, etc. And so people moved around in those times, particularly from the rural areas to the cities and towns where the new jobs were, whether they were within Yorkshire or to and from other places. And then the British Empire, a lot of people emigrated from Britain elsewhere to America, Australia and so forth, and very often we have people who have living in these countries now but who have ancestors from Yorkshire and other places in the United Kingdom. So, took the features of Yorkshire, and of course certain industries there. The coal is very much associated with Yorkshire, and here's a wee map of the West Riding coalfields. The locals call it God's own country. Probably as much pride in the county in Yorkshire as almost any other county in England. There's, in a natural sense, natural beauty, lovely coastline and so forth, and then historic cities. York, of course, cathedral city of York. Leeds, Bradford are ones that very much grew up to prominence during the Industrial Revolution. Different industries such as textiles, steel, Sheffield stainless steel. Yorkshire pudding, we could go on, and if I was from Yorkshire, no doubt I would. But of course all these things affected people's ancestors from Yorkshire and what they did. So let's look at records. Here's a marriage record in York in 1902, and like anywhere else we get, this is actually from the marriage register, Frederick White marrying Maud Whalley. We find out their ages, he's a traveller. Where they live, they both live in York, not too far from each other in those days, and we get the father's names and what they did. Is James White was a cigar merchant, not all that common. But these things obviously are the basis of us doing research and going back in time. We can then research back to the fathers, what they did and so forth, and see how far we get. So that's from York. And let's take a couple of examples, and what we're trying to do here, as I say, is illustrate to you the sort of things we might find in Yorkshire, similar to elsewhere in some cases, but for people who've lived in one place, very much a factor. Now, interestingly enough, what we're going to start with is a surname of a local place. Cusworth is a place just outside Doncaster, and here's a picture of Cusworth Hall. And that's where the name comes from. It actually goes way back. Cusworth named in the Domesday Book in the 11th century. The first record is of a Robert de Cusworth in 1358 in York. Now, de Cusworth suggests a Norman origin. Quite often with property like this, someone like that would have been gifted the land by William the Conqueror or after that, and taken the surname from the place that they were now the owner of, so hence de of Cusworth. So what happened with this case, there was someone called Cusworth living not all that far from Cusworth in Doncaster. So the question came up, I wonder if we're descended from the Cusworths and how far we can trace back. And in fact, the family had done some quite good work, and they found, here we are, Aaron Cusworth, born 1861 in Darfield, his father, George Cusworth in Wombwell. These are both places to the west of Doncaster, not too far away. And they got back to William Cusworth, who's baptised at the end of the 18th century in a place, Falkirk, which is a little bit to the north of there. Sort of jobs they did reflected the time. So George and Aaron were coal miners. Their father William was a farm labourer. A lot of people in those days worked on the land. So how far back could be traced where they were from. And in fact what we found was that William's father William was also baptised in the Church of St Peter in Falkirk, 1754, and his father too, James Cusworth, baptised 1725, so we're getting back almost 300 years, in Falkirk, so within 10 miles or so of the place of Cusworth. And then James's father Arthur was actually baptised in Hemsworth, parish just 2 or 3 miles from there, not far away at all. And we're back here now in the 17th century, and his father Thomas, in the middle of the 17th century, baptised in Hemsworth. So we're finding, going all the way back, that they're still within about 10 miles of the original Cusworth. Now, the chances of researching right back to 1300 or something where they are very slim, because the records don't exist in most cases, or certainly haven't survived, but we've got a good long way back with this connection. Another problem, of course, is the quality of the old record. So here, in fact, is the baptism record for Arthur Cusworth. Can you read that? I mean, I can, because I'm fairly experienced, but you can see the challenge. And very often you just get one bit of information. You feel it may or may not be right, but we're looking for evidence, we're looking for proof. So in this case, we did find records before Thomas Cusworth, but not anything we could place real certainty on the fact, yes, that's definitely Thomas's father. And here are the two churches, Falkirk St Peter and St Helen's Church in Hemsworth. Parishes were very much the format in the old days, and there would be a parish church, and so these people may have lived 3-4 miles from the parish church or what have you, but that would be the church they would go to. That would be the church in which they were baptised and married and buried, and where the record was kept. So another case of Buchanan, here we have William Buchanan. He's born in Sheffield in 1856, and his father is John. He's born in 1826. We just start with that information because it's an interesting example where we've got a Yorkshire person, but the connections are wider than that. In fact, John Buchanan was a gardener, and we looked and we found in the 1851 census, here he is in Eccleshall Bierlow near Sheffield, and we've transcribed the census entry, and what we have there is John Buchanan. He's a lodger, age 26, a gardener, born in Ayrshire, so born in Ayrshire in Scotland. And in fact, when we look here, we've got Jane Campbell, a widow, who is the housekeeper, also from Ayrshire, and we've got 4 gardeners, all her son, and the other 3 are lodgers. Son born in Derry in Ireland, but the other 3 are all born in Scotland, so that's interesting. So they're working as gardeners in Yorkshire, but there's a strong Scottish connection here. And so we look further, and we found actually in the census, here we have the entry we've just looked at, there's John Buchanan and Jane Campbell, but looking up the census, at the top is John Campbell, age 34, whereas Jane is 56. And he's also from Maybole, Ayrshire, so we will say with a fair degree of certainty that John is the son of Jane, and he's a gardener employing 30 men. And equally living with him, there's his daughter and son and so forth. But it sounds as though maybe that Scottish connection has been used to attract these gardeners from Ayrshire down to work in Yorkshire. Now, when we look further, at the bottom here we have George Wostenholme And Mary Wostenholme, George is a manufacturer born in Sheffield. And in fact, that's the clue here. What we find, in fact, is that George Wostenholme works for the company of George Wostenholme and Son, and he lived at Kenwood House, and that's where John Buchanan and the Campbells and the others were gardeners. So they were 30 gardeners working in his estate. George Wostenholme and Son was Sheffield Steel, specialised in knives and razors, very successful in the American market. And we're talking here, mid-1800s. George was an excellent salesman, but the ships across to America, they weren't your modern ships, they were still sailing ships. So subject to the vagaries of the winds, the trade winds going over there in the Gulf Stream. It would take a number of weeks, but he would go over. He was very well thought of, but still a degree of danger. And George Wostenholme's works were called the Washington Works, after Washington in America, where they had been so successful. So that's the way a story takes life. We investigate the ancestors, we find them, but then we find the story behind them, which what brings these people to life. And so, in fact, if you look at the Buchanans, in fact, John Buchanan was born in Kilwinning in Ayrshire, and they're very much an Ayrshire family. James Buchanan, his father from Ayrshire, is an agricultural labourer, his father from Irvine. In fact, they were back to Balfron in Stirlingshire. Buchanan, in fact, is a village to the east of Loch Lomond, which is where the name originally came from. Again, a place, a surname, a local surname, a place name. And in fact, what had happened afterwards, the Buchanans had returned to Scotland, and interestingly enough, Jean Buchanan was born in England, but that's another story. So a couple of examples there to illustrate Yorkshire. We've now got a lot of video playlists which you can look at to inform yourselves further, and if you want to get in touch and so forth. So one's about surnames, a particular interest we found with people, various aspects of bringing your ancestors to life. One's about your English, Scottish, particular background people. Quite interesting, found walking your ancestors' footsteps. One of the joys we find is actually organising something for people to come back and visit where their ancestors came from. So feel free to just Google research through people on YouTube, and you can see these videos and find out more. And then if you're interested, please feel free to get in touch. We have a free consultation. We want to look at what we may do for you and get back to you with the options so you can make an informed choice. The videos on YouTube I've mentioned, there's various contact details there. So please feel free to get in touch. We very much look forward to hearing from you.